No one can take a drop of Egypt's water, the threat from President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi as Ethiopia insists on filling a controversial Nile dam. He warns the consequences will be felt across the region. Does that mean he will go to war, and has diplomacy run out? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbarra. Egypt's share of the Nile River's water is untouchable. And if that supply is affected by the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, there will be severe regional consequences. That's the warning by the Egyptian president, whose country is in a years-long dispute with Ethiopia over the hydropower project. Ethiopia is building the $5 billion mega dam on the Blue Nile River. Downstream countries, Egypt and Sudan, are concerned that could affect their access to water. They want a legally binding agreement over the dam's operations, but talks to resolve the standoff have stalled over the past decade. Ethiopia started to fill the dam's reservoir last year with no deal in place. It insists its neighbors won't be harmed, and the dam is important to its economic development.
No one can take a single drop of water from Egypt, and whoever wants to try it, let them try. I'm not threatening anyone here. Our dialogue is always reasonable and rational. No one can take a drop from Egypt's water, and if it happens, there will be inconceivable instability in the region.
There's been a push for talks on the dam dispute to move forward. The EU and the US have shown they're ready to mediate. Their envoys met Sudan's Sovereign Council Chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, on Monday. That came after Sudan proposed mediation by a quartet of the African Union, the EU, the UN and the US. The suggestion was supported by Egypt, but rejected by Ethiopia. The US envoy, Senator Chris Coons, and Ethiopia's foreign minister held talks over the regional tensions earlier this month. And the foreign ministers of Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia are expected to meet in Abu Dhabi next week. The dispute mainly centers on the speed at which the reservoir behind the dam is filled. Among other differences are over how much water Ethiopia will release downstream if drought lasting years occurs. Egypt and Sudan demand a binding agreement on the dam's operation, while Ethiopia insists on guidelines alone. Egypt depends on the Nile River for almost all of its water. It fears a rapid filling of the reservoir would severely restrict the flow of the Nile. Sudan wants Ethiopia to share data on the dam's operation to avoid flooding and protect its own dams. Ethiopia says the hydroelectric power the dam produces is important to meet the energy needs of millions of Ethiopians who lack stable electricity supplies. When fully operational, the dam will become the largest hydroelectric plant in Africa. Let's bring in our guest in Nairobi, William Davison, Senior Ethiopia Analyst at International Crisis Group. In London, Alam Ahmed is President of the World Association for Sustainable Development. In Oslo, Gautam Gabriel is a political analyst focusing on the Horn of Africa. Welcome to the program. William, this is not the first time that Egypt has warned of repercussions if there's no political progress on the issue of the dam. Are they serious this time? Should the Ethiopians take into consideration the latest statement by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi?
It's not clear exactly what is new about the Egyptian positioning. Certainly, there's some alarming rhetoric there, but of course, the president also said that this is not a threat. I mean, I think ultimately this looks very much like a repeat of the situation last year when Ethiopia did the first year's filling of the reservoir of the Renaissance Dam. We have the second filling scheduled to occur probably in July, according to the Ethiopian schedule. And again, we are seeing tensions rise in advance of that. Yes, there is some threatening rhetoric here. I think most people would judge, but it isn't really that clear. You know, what has changed substantively in terms of the situation. So I don't really expect Ethiopia to change its position, which is to proceed with the construction and the filling of the dam, along with construction, as it engages in these continued negotiations.
Alam, the Egyptian caveat, the fact that there are other issues on the table, could that be an indication that we might see any confrontation in the near future if there's no tangible result as far as the political process is concerned?
Thank you very much. Just to follow up on my colleague, I think there isn't much new. The Egyptians have used this threatening language before. Donald Trump, a month before he left office, he said that, and I remember I was commenting, he said Egypt could use force. The main issue here is that this is more of the style of the Egyptian negotiation has always been like this. To expect confrontation, I don't expect confrontation because the general situation in the region, even within Egypt itself, Sudan and Ethiopia, is not favoring that confrontation, but we will continue to listen and to hear such threatening tone. And I expect, I hope, the Sudanese government also will raise their tempo a little bit to match this tempo of the Egyptians so that we can have a level play of voices so the Egyptians can take it more seriously, that their neighbors are not sitting there silent, accepting what they're doing. Just finally, I think the issues with negotiation, even I know there are going to be maybe a round of negotiation in the next few weeks, but really the bottom line still remain the same, and people should go back to the original questions. The land is a disputed land. Benishangul is still claiming this. No one is listening to them. The amount of water is going to be pumped into this dam is still almost technical experts have raised this concern. It will kill people. We're talking about the death of people possible in Sudan because the capacity is being argued is quite high. Many scientists have so far said it should only be 11 billion cubic meters. And we need Ethiopia to listen seriously, at least this time, to open up their technical file so people can go forward and we can save lives.
Okay, Gautam, at this particular point, what do you think is the main sticking point? Is it the filling of the reservoir and how much time should that take? We have this whole argument between 12 to 21 years, as the Egyptians are saying, or 6 years, as the Ethiopians are insisting.
I think the main sticking point is for Egypt to reach a binding agreement before the filling continues. Once it's filled, Ethiopia will have the upper hand and can negotiate from a position of strength. But I think we have to consider the recent political dynamics. Ethiopia is currently conducting what looks like a genocidal war on its own people. So given that it has been behaving this irresponsibly, it is understandable that both Khartoum and Cairo are worried, and that they don't want to give up the lifeline of their peoples to such an irresponsible regime, and that they want a binding legal mechanism that can regulate how this dam is operationalized. So we need to consider the political dimensions as well.
All right. William, so the reservoir can reach something like 74 billion cubic meters. That's going to be a huge leverage for the Ethiopian government in the near future. In the meantime, the Sudanese and the Egyptians are saying, wait a second, we need the ISAIA, which is the environmental and social impact assessment, to be implemented, and it has to be binding before we move forward. In between these two key aspects, how do you see things unfolding?
Well, with regards to the impact assessment, that's certainly been a focus of controversy throughout the sort of lifespan of construction, which began in 2010. What we're really looking at now is an agreement about the filling and operating rules or guidelines of the Renaissance Dam. Yes, it is a large dam. But if it's managed cooperatively, then there is no reason for it necessarily to cause significant harm downstream, which is a key phrase here. Ethiopia has set out a filling schedule, and if there is average or above average rain in the Blue Nile Basin over the next 5 years, it will fill the dam with something like a fifth of the average flow of the Blue Nile being impounded every year. If there are shortages in any given year, the length of time it will take to fill the dam will be extended by a couple of years. So there is a plan there. Of course, what this is really about is getting the political agreement and building trust so that Ethiopia building this dam and backing up all that water, as you mentioned, is not seen as a threat. And of course, this comes down to the nitty-gritty of what's being argued here. People talk about a binding agreement or not. I think Ethiopia is willing to sign up to, it's willing to make a commitment on the filling schedule here. What Ethiopia is not willing to do is get into any sort of agreement which it considers to be a water sharing agreement. And it is also not willing to get into an agreement on its own dam where international arbitration is the final phase in any dispute resolution process. Ethiopia wants those water sharing issues to be discussed by all Nile Basin countries, and that gets to some of the sort of underlying disagreements about this dispute over this one dam.
And this is why it's getting more complicated with time. Alam, you spoke about the concerns voiced by Sudan and Egypt, particularly when it comes to the flooding and the water downstream. But when you talk to the Ethiopians, they will tell you that the highlands, particularly the Blue Nile and the Atbara, both of which are major tributaries that contribute something like 80% to the water that flows downstream. And therefore, it's a legitimate right from an Ethiopian perspective to have a final say over how to move forward.
I think that's a point, but in response to that point, there are other more critical points need to be considered. The land itself where the dam is being built, it has been disputed. It's a land so far, we hear strongly is belong to Benishangul. This is a big these are Sudanese people, this is their land. How it's being given and how the dam was being built is all things to do with the former regime, which was 100% documented by the whole world as a corrupt regime. So we can't take that into account. We have to take that into account. Secondly, all scientists, as I said earlier, said the way it's being discussed or the technical files or the technical makeup of this mega project is not open for anyone to check it. No external or independent verification of how it's going to operate. So far, what we hear, any more than 11 million cubic meters will be dangerous to kill people downstream, particularly in Sudan. No one is listening to all these facts. So we have to deal with these facts first before we can talk about environmental issues to do whether it is highland or how the water is coming from both rivers. These are serious questions, and I have said this from last year. If we do not really go back to basic, and Ethiopian government is willing to open up their files for technical expert in order to see how can we save the lives of the Sudanese, the Egyptian, and more importantly, the Ethiopians themselves. There's lots of conflict inside Ethiopia about the way the government is behaving here. And finally, I think this is a fact, we cannot ignore it. We are talking about a project already 80% built. We all understand that. But that's where experts can find a solution to such massive investment. We can't sit down, see, okay, what can we do? It's a huge amount being sucked in, 80% project completed, what can we do? But we can only think about that as expert once the government of Ethiopia is willing and accepting international independent expert to be intervened.
Well, this is why they are concerned about issues of that related to national sovereignty, as they have been saying. Goitem, now, you've been talking about the internal issues that Ethiopia is facing, but Ethiopians will tell you that the 1929 and the 1959 agreements were a legacy of a colonial era where the rights of the Ethiopians were never taken into consideration, and that the dam itself is a reality that the Sudanese and the Egyptians have to deal with. The Sudanese in particular are in favor of the involvement of the African Union, the EU, the United Nations, and the US. Could that be productive?
Yes, overall, I think we need to consider the two principles of international law that apply here. So the colonial agreements are null and void in my view. And so one principle is that Ethiopia has the right to develop its own resources within its territories. It's a matter of sovereignty. Now, Sudan and Egypt have come a long way from initially not recognizing that to now accepting that Ethiopia has the right to build a dam. The other principle is, of course, that Ethiopia cannot cause any significant harm to downstream countries. Now, since the two downstream countries have come a long way to recognize Ethiopia's right to develop its resources, it is now incumbent upon Ethiopia to also recognize its responsibility not to cause significant harm. Mm-hmm. And that is a legal issue, and it's not so much about what's happening today. Seen from Cairo and Khartoum's perspective, 20 years from now, they must have some sort of reassurances that whoever is in charge in Ethiopia is not going to utilize those resources to negatively impact Khartoum and Cairo. So they must have a say in how this is operationalized in the future. This is not merely a sovereignty issue. I mean, we have to balance those two considerations.
All right.
And I believe a quartet mediation is the right approach for that.
But William, this is the problem when we have all those key players stepping in. There are different political agendas playing out, and many are concerned that if you have all those parties coming together, the potential for any solution to the problem might take ages, because the simple issue here is you have a dam which has been erected on the Blue Nile, widely seen as an existential threat by the Egyptian government. If you have the three key players, Sudan, Egypt, and the Ethiopians, working out the details of a permanent agreement, that could help without having to go to all those parties.
Yes, of course, but the negotiations have been going on for some time. The increased international concern, focus on this issue is a result of the failure to agree. That said, last year, of course, the US, the Trump administration got heavily involved, and the Ethiopians backed out of that deal. They said there was too much international pressure being applied here. I mean, at the moment, the file is with the African Union. There is huge amounts of concern about the failure to agree on the Renaissance Dam, also about the tensions between Sudan and Ethiopia on the border, also very much Ethiopia's internal situation, particularly the Tigray conflict. I think increasingly, these big international actors, particularly the new US administration, is looking at the Horn of Africa and as I've said, are very concerned. But I don't think taking over or trying to reformulate the mediation or the negotiations at this point is going to be successful, because I don't think that Ethiopia is going to agree to that. Instead, what I think we might see is an expanded role for the African Union, for technical experts, and perhaps for observers from the EU and the US in these African Union-led negotiations. But I don't think at this stage we're going to see a significant reformulation of how this is mediated.
Alam, you spoke about some of the concerns voiced by the Sudanese government about the vicinity towards to the project, about concerns of flooding, but others would tell you that the Sudanese ultimately may be the ones to benefit from the dam. They will get less flooding, cheaper electricity, and easier irrigation, which is going to be pretty much very well planned ahead.
Yes, that's the point been surfacing for the last time, for a long time. But to tell you the truth, I am following the Sudanese commentators, scientists, professors, people who are in the far front of these irrigation dams and top project manager, engineer, and so on. All of them seems to agree, despite all these assumptions, without knowing the real technical makeup of that project, we cannot guarantee we will get this benefit, because instead of getting good irrigation, blah, 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 all the items you mentioned, we might get flooding, and then we end up having our people being dying on the river. But the second important thing, we don't know exactly what is happening in Sudan. This is another major issue. We cannot ignore it. The government, unfortunately, in Sudan, the transitional government has been shattered. They haven't taken control, really, of this file. We have been arguing. Many experts said the same. we don't know exactly how they are tackling this. Every time they have a different viewpoint. Technically, unfortunately, the Sudanese own ministers of irrigation, they are not listening to many groups, experts within the same country. Professor Ghuresh is a well-known academics professor. He is an MIT graduate, top scientist worldwide. I can hardly see the government listening to him. I myself have argued for the minister to listen to Sudanese experts, such like we have project managers like Dr. Amir from Manchester, top people. They are not listening to them. Therefore, we cannot verify whether this dam will really going to benefit our poor people in Sudan or not. And that can only be verified if our own engineers can be listened to by the current Sudanese government. And then we have more transparency and files open in front of our expert, then we can say, yes, it is going to benefit our people. And I just to conclude by, I think
if you don't mind,
the best thing we expect that the life of the Sudanese people should be also treated like a red line, the same like the Egyptian Prime Minister, the President yesterday said.
Okay,
the same Sudanese lives are also in the red line.
Goitam, you spoke earlier about the problems that Ethiopia faces. We're talking about the Tigray issue and also the border confrontations with Sudan over the Fashaga border area. Those two issues, do you think they will stand as a major obstacle for Abiy Ahmed if he decides to take an aggressive stance in the near future?
Absolutely. I mean, the way we got here in the first place, the way Ethiopia was able to challenge Egypt's monopoly on the Nile for all these years was, first of all, that Ethiopia consolidated its power internally. And secondly, it developed good relations with its neighbors, notably Sudan. And Sudan's support for this dam was essential. And there was no way for Egypt to sort of destabilize Ethiopia or to actually do anything to reverse this process. Abiy Ahmed has changed both those factors significantly over the last 3 years. Internally, the country is in turmoil. You know, significant chunks of the country are either in are either rebel-held territories or under the occupation of foreign armies or military command posts. There are insurgencies in different parts of the country. By his own admission, Ethiopia's military capacity is significantly depleted in Tigray, hence why he needs to use Eritrean soldiers as mercenaries to fight his wars in Tigray. And secondly, of course, the key factor in this process was relations with Sudan, which have also broken down, which means Ethiopia has very little leverage left in this
I see your point.
Situation.
William, ultimately, the dam will have to go ahead, and the Ethiopians are insisting this is an issue of national sovereignty. No one is expecting to see any military confrontations. The Egyptians will have to cross the airspace of Sudan to bomb the dam. If that happens, that could be catastrophic for Sudan itself. In the meantime, no one is talking about water management schemes, about the recycling of the wastewater, about the need for Egyptians themselves to set up desalination plants and understand this is a new uncharted territory and they have to cope with the new realities.
I think those things are being talked about, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's sort of better water efficiency throughout the Nile Basin, more water storage, more efficient irrigation, that type of thing. It just so happens that the debate is very much focused on this dam at the moment. And of course, this dam, yes, it could cause harm downstream in Sudan if it's managed in a certain way. But it could reduce flooding in Sudan, boost irrigation, boost electricity potential. And it doesn't have to cause harm in Egypt at all. The issue is that this type of project, this type of project with a transboundary impact, it has to be cooperatively managed. And this failure and this preoccupation with the Renaissance Dam, looking only at the potential harm it can cause, and the worsening political tensions is, of course, to the detriment of focusing on water saving or a more overall wider-ranging cooperative arrangement for the Nile Basin.
We have to leave it there. Thanks to our guests, William Davison, Alam Ahmed, and Goitam Gabriel. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashim Al Barra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.